Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Charity Village webinar. We're going to get started in just a moment. We want to make sure everyone gets a chance to join online here today before we kick things off. And I can see we've got folks joining from across the country. So that's wonderful to see. We're so happy to have all of you here with us today and really appreciate you taking some time out of your busy days to spend with us and with CanadaHelps here today. Excellent. So I know we have a lot to cover today, so I think we'll go ahead and kick things off. So again, to those just joining, welcome to today's Charity Village webinar. My name is Marina Dawson, and on behalf of Charity Village, I'm very pleased to welcome you and thank you for joining us today. As we are gathering here on a virtual platform, it is very important for us to acknowledge that each of us is joining this webinar from the ancestral or unceded lands of the Inuit, Métis, and First Nation people who call Turtle Island home. For myself, I'm speaking to you today from the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Snuneymuxw First Nation. And I'd like to extend my deep gratitude to the Snuneymuxw people for the privilege of living and working on their beautiful land. Now, before we start today's webinar, I'd like to make a few introductions and quickly run through some housekeeping items. For those of you who might be joining us for a webinar for the first time, Charity Village is Canada's largest online job board for the nonprofit sector. And in addition to our online job board, organizations can also post volunteer positions. So if you're looking for work or to recruit talent in the sector, Charity Village is the place to start. We also have a lot of excellent resources for nonprofit professionals, including online courses, articles, fundraising tools, and free webinars like the one we're presenting today. Now, before we start today's webinar, I'll just quickly run through a few housekeeping items. You may have noticed when you joined the webinar today that you were automatically put on mute. Since we do have hundreds of participants on today's session, it's very important for us to minimize the amount of background noise so that everyone can clearly hear the presentation. You can still ask questions, of course, and make comments. Just use the question box at the bottom of the Zoom control panel. So look for that at the bottom of your screen. We will be taking questions at the end of the webinar, so please submit your questions as you think of them. We'll do our best to get to as many as possible. You can also email your questions to webinars@charityvillage.com. If you happen to encounter any technical issues today with the webinar, with viewing the presentation or with the audio, just let us know in that question box or by sending us an email. And we'll do our best to get any technical difficulties resolved as quickly as possible. But in a worst case scenario, just remember we are recording today's webinar and we will send you that full recording by email, most likely by tomorrow morning. So if you get called away or disconnected for any reason at all, you'll still be able to view the full presentation afterwards. With that, I'd like to welcome our presenter for today, Shannon Craig, who's General Manager of Donor Services and Brand Marketing at CanadaHelps. Welcome, Shannon. We're so happy to have you here sharing the giving report today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the invitation from Charity Village to speak today. And I'd really like to thank everyone for taking the time to join this session. We are speaking here today about the greatest challenges facing charities. And we'll also be discussing what actions we can take to protect and strengthen the charities that we represent and the charitable sector as a whole. I'm quite sure that everyone cares deeply about the sector, so I am so thankful for you taking time out of your busy day to be here. I too would like to just take a moment to first off acknowledge the land that we reside on. Here I'm speaking to the offices of CanadaHelps head office, which we're in the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 and the Mississaugas of the Credit. So as mentioned, my name is Shannon Craig. Just to say a little bit about me, I've had a 25-year plus career in marketing. I started my career working at leading brands that I admired, including Lego and FedEx. And then in time, I went to the .com world and worked for many high-tech disruptors and startups, including Wind Mobile when it was, which is now Freedom Mobile, as well as the Kobo e-reading company. So clearly I didn't start out in this sector. I didn't have that foresight and the understanding of what really mattered to me, frankly, to have that in mind. I'm always so admired the young Canadians that are entering the sector day one, knowing this is their home. But to me, it's been the greatest privilege of all to be able to shift into the charitable sector and join CanadaHelps in 2013. And as Marina mentioned today, I serve as the General Manager of Donor Services and Brand Marketing at CanadaHelps. And the giving report has become one of my favorite things. It is dense. There's a lot to it. It's a lot of talking today. And I will try to make it as informative and light, but it is data, so there is a lot. So it's jam-packed, so let's dive right in. So our agenda for today, first, we're going to take a deep dive into what is happening in our sector regarding key trends such as giving, burnout, volunteers, and more. We're then going to take a closer look into who is giving and lean into some of our rich Environics analytics analysis and CanadaHelps' data to really show trends in who's giving. And then we're going to finally move in to look at the future and see how we can take these challenging trends and turn them into something we can act upon. We will then leave some time for questions and answers, so please make sure to drop them in the chat. Okay, first I'm going to just start off with a little bit about CanadaHelps. CanadaHelps has been serving charities and donors since the year 2000. Over our 23-year history, more than 3.8 million Canadians have donated more than $2.6 billion to charities from coast to coast using CanadaHelps. For Canadians, CanadaHelps provides a safe and trusted destination to support any of Canada's 86,000 charities. And for charities, we develop affordable fundraising technology that's used by about 26,000 of Canada's charities today, and really is helping to ensure that all charities, regardless of their size, have access to the capacity they need to succeed in today's digital world. Now I'll just tell you a little bit about the giving report. So we published our first annual giving report in 2017, and we did it to provide a snapshot of the giving trends facing the charitable sector and to really help Canadians understand these trends. Leveraging the vast volume and breadth of online giving data at CanadaHelps and analysis of the latest tax filer data, we paint a really detailed picture of the trends and how Canadians are giving. The report is published in partnership with Environics Analytics and Imagine Canada. These are both two incredibly skilled organizations, which I expect you're familiar with, more than likely. And they support us in bringing real depth to the report, as well as allow us to go deeper each year. We are so thankful for their support. For charities on today's call, a lot of the challenges I'm about to share are very likely not new to you. You are living them firsthand. Regardless, we want to set up today's session laying out what's facing thousands of charities across the country. After that, we'll dive into what we can do about it. To get a real pulse on the state of the charitable sector this year, we worked with Nano's research, in addition to Environics and Imagine Canada. And just shy of 3,000 Canadian charity professionals completed our survey. And it was almost as many, almost one for each of those charities. And they did this in late November of 2022. And it is a highly representative study. So 3,000 representatives, I think it was 2,900 charities. It's highly representative of the charities in Canada. It represented all types of charities, so all the different types of categories and all the different sizes, from fully volunteer run to the very, very largest charities in Canada. And it was not a light survey. It took approximately 30 minutes for each person to complete it. So it really, we're so thankful. And for anyone on the call that participated, thank you, because it is only because the sector really believes in it and takes this time that we can present this authoritative picture on what's happening today. So before we dive into this year's report, please join me in taking this poll. Okay, so how do you feel about the future strength of the charitable sector in Canada 5 years from now? That's the question. Answer. Possibly you're very pessimistic, very optimistic, not sure, somewhere in the middle? I look forward to your response. Interesting. Okay, so I'll just give everyone a second to look at the results. We can see we have 1% very pessimistic, so about 20% have some pessimism right today, 25% neutral, and about 50%, well, that may be a little bit off, but 48% in that optimistic range. I'm going to leave it and say no more at this point in time, but we're going to come back to this poll a little bit later on. So trust me, we'll come back to it. Okay, so now I'm going to get into the meat of the presentation. So it's quite clear that the unprecedented growth in demand for charitable services, compounded with inflation and revenue shortfalls, signals the emergence of severe challenges in the sector. The survey highlighted 4 key issues: unprecedented demand, funding challenges, the challenges inflation is having within organizations, and the resulting personnel burnout. First, let's talk about demand. Of the charities we surveyed, 40% of charities have experienced a lasting increase in demand since the pandemic. More than half, 57% to be exact, cannot meet current levels of demand. 57%. And 22% of charities characterize demand as significantly exceeding capacity. The percentage of charities reporting they are unable to meet demand is alarmingly high across charities of all sizes, but it should be noted it is mid-sized charities with annual revenue of $1 million to $2.5 million in revenue, where we see the greatest share of charities unable to meet demand at 70%. The net of this is less than 1/3 of charities say that demand is met with their organization's current resources. And if you are doing the math and saying that doesn't add up to 100%, you're right. While we're going to focus today more on the 57% of charities unable to meet demand, I do want to point out that there is a smaller group of charities whose experience has been very different. For this group, the pandemic shut down programs and their hard work of rebuilding it is just not done. Demand is still below pre-pandemic levels. Recovering after a full stop is challenging, and that is particularly true for small charities who have fewer resources to leverage to rebuild. 11% of charities fall into this group. Okay, more about demand. When it comes to how this translates to everyday Canadians, when we conducted our Ipsos poll late last fall, 2 in 10 Canadians, or 22% to be exact, reported that they expected to rely on charities for basic needs such as food, shelter, clothing in the next 6 months. This is a shocking increase of 14% over the same study that we ran in just 10 months earlier. That is the data that is in the Given report. In May, since publishing the Given report, we ran the study again. The predictions were correct and actually slightly conservative. Our May Ipsos poll revealed that 23% of Canadians are currently accessing charitable services to meet essential needs. And sadly, the study shows that this will continue to grow to 26% of Canadians by the fall of this year. 1 in 4 Canadians. It is just simply unthinkable. Diving a bit deeper into the study, we can see individuals hardest hit include parents and younger Canadians. Families are being especially hard hit, with 3 in 10 parents expecting to seek the support of charitable services in the next year. That's up 2% since the fall. 38% of young Canadians aged 18 to 34 and 30% of those aged 35 to 54 are more likely to require charitable services in the near future. That means younger Canadians are being harder hit than older Canadians, where the numbers are still alarmingly high at 14% of those aged 55 and older. 62% of those that are turning to charity are doing so because they cannot keep pace with the rising cost of living, And thus it follows that Canadians with household incomes below $40,000 a year are most in need, with 46% turning to charity. That is up 11 percentage points from the fall of 2022. Our team is going to continue to track this data and publish it and share it loudly as we can, because we know that Canadians need to know this. And it's understanding this need is critical to fueling the charitable sector. So you can watch our CanadaHelps channels for updated information on this. All right, the next one, that was demand, fewer funds. So this is challenge number 2 that we're going to talk about here. The report shares that while most charities are unable to meet demand, funds raised are reported as down for many charities. It breaks down as follows. Slightly less than half of charities surveyed, 45% to be exact, report that funding levels are equal to pre-pandemic levels. 31% of charities say funding is below pre-pandemic levels. And just 12% of charities report that their current fundraising results are higher than pre-pandemic levels. So while some charities may have experienced higher revenue, 2 times as many are experiencing declines and struggling. We'll talk more about this disparity between charities and what they're raising a little bit later on. On the topic of funding, I also want to speak to the percentage of Canadians giving, which is we refer to as the giving participation rate. We think it's very important to measure how many Canadians are participating in giving, because we think a strong charitable sector requires the generosity of all Canadians. It really, really is something that, to be vibrant, needs widespread participation. So we track this very closely, and we're not alone. Many organizations do. In fact, I think it was Imagine Canada that did their 30 years of giving, and that's the stat I'm using to the farthest left. We leverage, but we continue to track this each year, and we leverage income tax filings to track the giving participation rate. We know it's not perfect. For example, for couples, it's advantageous for the spouse who earns more to claim all the donations made by the couple. That said, we know awareness of charitable tax credits is high. We also know from our past research that 74% of Canadians who report having made a charitable donation in the last year also report having claimed their donation on their tax return. Finally, we know Canadians file their tax receipt every year, making it a reliable and consistent indicator for tracking giving participation levels. So, okay, let's turn to the data. In 2020, the most recent year of data available to support the giving report, we see only 18% of Canadians claimed donations. That is down 11 percentage points in 30 years. And almost half of that drop, 5 percentage points, is in the last 10 years. So let's go a little deeper. Since the launch of the giving report, CanadaHelps has continued to raise concerns about the giving gap. The giving gap refers to the gap between giving by older Canadians and younger Canadians today, and the need to ensure that younger Canadians are ready to step up when today's core older donors are no longer able to give. There have been small improvements in terms of the numbers of Canadians under 25 years of age giving, growing from 5% in 2010 to 6% in 2020, but all other ages have had their participation rates decline. Giving by Canadians aged 25 to 34 dropped from 17.6% in 2010 to 11.9% in 2020. Giving by Canadians aged 35 to 54 dropped from 25.3% in 2010 to 19% in 2020. And even amongst those aged 55 plus, giving dropped from 30% in 2010 to 23.8% in 2020. Now let's look in terms of dollars. What we see is that the amount given has only seen significant growth in the last 10 years from Canadians 55 years of age and older. While there is a smaller share of Canadians 55 years of age and older giving, those that are giving more. What's happening is giving is falling to a smaller group of older Canadians, and the question is, what will happen when they are no longer able to give? The minimal growth from this age group from 2019 and 2020 is concerning. Again, let's go a little bit deeper. While to look at giving participation rates by age, we rely on individual income tax filer data. To look at giving by income bracket, we use the same income tax return data, but we look at it by household. Among individual households, the giving participation rate has dropped by 8 percentage points from 36% to 28%. Remember, there's that difference here because when you look at it by households, usually the top income earner is the one who's claiming. So that's why these have raised. It all makes sense. But you can see the same levels. You can see that there's a decline at the household level as well. We see that the drops are steepest amongst households with the highest incomes. Participation dropped 23% for households with incomes of $100,000 to $149,000. 24% for households with incomes of $150,000 to $249,000, and 19% for households with income of $250,000 or more. While it's unclear exactly why this is occurring, the trends are concerning and something we need to contend with. All right, let's turn to our CanadaHelps data, where we can look at more recent years. We operate in the online world and we process average donations of $150 each. We process a smaller share of major gifts, but as the world moves to digital, we have seen strong growth in online giving with the shift from offline to online. But in recent years, we've seen some softening trends. At the start of the pandemic, we experienced triple-digit growth, raising $480 million in 2020, a 116% increase from the year before. However, 1 year later in 2021, growth dropped 2%. And in 2022, growth was just 4%. 4% may sound like good news, but it is significantly below the 22.4% average rate of growth each year between 2010 and 2020. We are seeing the softening tied to new donors and donors who made fewer and smaller gifts, leaving us cause to believe that it reflects Canadians needing to cut back on giving as they struggle with rising cost of living. All right, challenge number 3, inflation. Let's talk about how inflation has made it more challenging for charities to operate. From staffing to program delivery, charities are being critically impacted by inflation with challenges across their operations. 80% of charities report that inflation has impacted their service delivery costs, while funding has not increased to meet this demand. 44% of charities reported that staff salaries increased due to inflation, but without an increase in funding, the only option is to cut expenses at a time when Canadians need them most. Challenge number 4 is burnout. Charities are facing serious challenges when it comes to staff and volunteers. Many charities continue to struggle to rebuild their volunteer programs post-pandemic, with 55% of charities saying they have fewer volunteers now than they did prior to the pandemic. After inflation, staff burnout was ranked as the second highest concern out of 24 areas probed on for charities today. Close to 60% of charities report they have the same number of paid staff working despite heightened service demands, while 15% say they have decreased staff since the pandemic started. Only 24% report more paid staff. I also just want to take a moment to speak to a trend facing smaller charities. The Giving Report 2023 finds small charities did not adapt as well as large charities to the financial strains of the first year of the pandemic. While more charities increased their investment in fundraising to help weather challenging times, small charities, which make up about 78% of all charities, and we define those as those that have less than $500,000 in annual revenue, well, they did not increase their investment in key fundraising areas. Being small means they have less staff and budget to leverage in response to challenging times. This is clear when we look at charity 2020 tax returns versus 2019. What we see is small charities with less than $500,000 in annual revenue experience an 8% decline in the margin, meaning the difference between their total revenue less their expenses. In contrast, medium and large charities with annual revenue above $500,000 were better able to adapt to year one of the pandemic, experience a decline of only 4%. So now we can shift a little bit. I'm going to take a sip of water. One second. Thank you. So let's just shift gears a little bit and think about who is giving. We've laid the land. We need to understand who is giving. And by using both CanadaHelps data and Environics Analytics data insights, we're going to do just that. Now that we have the lay of the land, we want to understand who is giving, who are the actual donors on the ground in Canada. How we have done this is using the Environics Analytics data. And they've taken the CanadaHelps data, anonymized, and combined it with all of their prism segments and value segments so that we could really get a representative sample of the Canadian market and tie it to Canadians and the very all of the different demographic segments that Environics has developed. So who is giving? What we have here is a distribution of unique lifestyle segments that Environics found within the CanadaHelps database. Otherwise, understanding these are the type of Canadians that are giving. And you can see, based on some of these names, that there's a wide range of types of donors that we can see, from wealthy donors to senior donors to downtown donors to urban mixed francophone segments. We have really, really different groups that we're talking about here. To build this out a little bit more, let's use wealthy families as an example. Wealthy families are middle-aged or older families, and they reside in Canada's most affluent communities. And they do have a strong propensity to engage with charities. Downtown donors, this is another example. They are younger, white-collar singles and couples, and they tend to live in vibrant urban centers across the country. They also engage with charities, but across multiple donation categories. By that, we see a lot of breadth and depth in the organizations that they are supporting. The groups that we are looking at here, they make up 57% of the total Canadian household population, 18 plus, and they make up 82% of all donors in the CanadaHelps donor database. So again, this is an incredibly robust representative sample. From the graph, it is very clear that there are two specific segments that make up a large share of donors. So again, we see wealthy families representing 21% of donors and downtown donors representing 11%. But what is most interesting about these two groups is that their actual dollar contribution or donation contributions is actually a larger portion. You can see here that wealthy donors represent 21% of donors, but they are giving more. Their contributions represent 27% of total donations. Likewise, downtown donors represent 11% of donors, but contribute 13% of donations. Now take a look at the rest of the segments that we see here. We see that those donation levels are about on par with the proportion of those segments, with suburban and rural families a call out because they are a bit bigger, larger groups representing 15% of all donors and donations. And again, all of the groups we see are very representative of overall Canadians and who's giving. Another key takeaway from this particular slide and from what I'm sharing here is that as we seek to increase the number of Canadians who give, here we can see a positive signal. Each of these segments already has an established base of donors. An established base of donors means we have the base from which to learn and grow, and a wide range of donors on the ground. So it's really a matter of engaging them with it and bringing them along for our journey. The next thing about giving, you really could not speak to 2022 without mentioning Ukraine. So one of the most significant trends we saw in 2022 was how strong Canadians showed up for Ukraine. Overall donation support of international charities represented 9% of total donations through CanadaHelps last year, which is very significant. I mean, that is basically 1 in 10 gifts that came through were to support humanitarian relief efforts in response to the war in Ukraine. Now, in 2022, all of these donor segments have generously shown up to support the international category, with donations nearly double across every one of these groups. And also, so what this means is that when you looked at the groups last year, they're about half the size from the international donation category. Now, dollars donated to Ukraine made up over 90% of donations to the international category across all donor segments. Again, quite significant, representing 9 out of 10 gifts to the international relief segment. That's very significant. Now, this is quite inspiring and has certainly fueled the response efforts of the roughly 0.15% of Canada's charities that are responding in support of Ukraine. But that said, it's such a substantial portion of funding that 9% is going to a very small group of charities. It suggests significant funding shortfalls for other charities at a time when many are experiencing increased demand. All right, next trend that I'd love to touch on is Giving Tuesday. I expect most of us know what Giving Tuesday is here, but it remains.
Hi, everyone.
It
It
has
looks
been
like we
growing
may
every
have
year since it
just
launched
lost Shan.
in 2022, donated on Giving Tuesday. It is huge. So sorry. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now, Shannon. All good. Hopefully that was just one little blip there. So maybe if you could just back up maybe 30 or 45 seconds, that would be great.
Did you hear the last of the Ukraine?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So thank you. And I apologize, everyone. So Giving Tuesday, I expect you're familiar with it. It is a day that has grown every year since it launched in Canada in 2013. 2022 was certainly no exception. In 2022, 5% of all donors who donated through CanadaHelps gave on Giving Tuesday. That's one single day of the year, 5% of all donors. What's also noteworthy is that 32% of Giving Tuesday's donors made additional gifts in the holiday period. So November through December. They came on Giving Tuesday, but they came an additional time, at least once, in November and December. And in terms of who is donating on Giving Tuesday, we see a high percentage of wealthy families, downtown donors, senior donors, and urban mixed donors. Now, for those of you not intimately aware of these different audiences, if you download the Giving report, you will find full descriptions in the appendix so that you can familiarize yourself with how we're segmenting the audience. What I can tell you for this insight is that there is an urban skew. The more close one lives to an urban center, based on the data, the more likely they gave on Giving Tuesday. And in terms of returning Giving Tuesday donors, we have some really interesting takeaways. More than 1/4 of all 2022 Giving Tuesday donors were returning donors who gave on earlier in the year prior to Giving Tuesday. I'm sorry, they were returning Giving Tuesday donors, meaning that not only did they give on Giving Tuesday in 2022, they also gave on Giving Tuesday 2021 or 2020. So they like giving on Giving Tuesday. The day has stickiness. So it means that if you get a donor on Giving Tuesday, there's a high likelihood that they're going to return next year. Plus, we see 1/3 of these Giving Tuesday donors will make an additional gift by end of December. Now, returning Giving Tuesday donors tend to have higher numbers of gifts throughout the year as well. So what this means on top of that, they're more likely to make another gift by the end of the year. They're likely to have given in previous Giving Tuesdays, and they are likely to give in future Giving Tuesday. But on top of all of that, these are also the donors that tend to already be giving throughout the year and are likely to continue to engage with your organization beyond just on Giving Tuesday. So it's a great day to get out there. But I think the data says it all, but before I move on, I'm going to dive into a specific analysis we did at CanadaHelps. We did it over the last 5 years. And our analysis reveals that charities that actively participate in Giving Tuesday raised 256 times more on the day of Giving Tuesday, and that charities that do not participate than charities that don't participate. But even more interesting, from the day after Giving Tuesday through to December 31st, participating charities raise 5.7 times more than charities that do not participate. And best of all, our data shows that charities that participate become better fundraisers. So this next slide, what we're showing here is that over the last 5 years, we've tracked the incremental lift participating charities experience, not just on the day and during holiday, but the rest of the year. And what we see is that few charities drop off. Once they participate in Giving Tuesday, they keep participating. We slowly increase the number of charities that are participating. Right now, we see 39% of charities participating in Giving Tuesday. The charities skew smaller, but because they're representative of the CanadaHelps donor base. But you can see as they start to leverage the campaign of Giving Tuesday and all the support that goes with it, their fundraising grows. So this is comparing over time how charities participating in Giving Tuesday perform the rest of the year prior to Giving Tuesday versus non-participating charities. And we think it's pretty compelling and hope that more charities will get that 39% to 100% in time. All right. I just wanted to add one more point to this section on giving before we get into the actions. This slide here is our online giving index. When the online giving index is at 100, it means that the standard rate of growth is happening. The benchmark that we're benchmarking this off of is based on growth in 2018. And remember, I just said we were growing at 22% consistently. So you can see that consistent growth before the pandemic. You see the spike with the pandemic. You see it taper off year 2 of the pandemic. But really what happened is December 2021, the online giving index hit 80 points, representing the first decline in giving. For clarity, it means that giving in December 2021 was less than dollars given in December 2020 online. With economic uncertainty came dramatically lower or negative year-over-year growth throughout 2022. In November 2022, the online giving index hit a new all-time low of 66 points, immediately following the December 2022 spike to 98 points. We forecasted at CanadaHelps that this was going to happen. We were concerned, the economy, the changing inflation rates, we were concerned that even Canadians able to give would make certain they wanted to see how their investments were performing. They wanted to make sure they felt comfortable, they'd still be employed, and that they would be more considered and deliberate in their giving. And that's what we saw. Giving Tuesday hit, and from that day forward, giving showed up. I mention this because I think it's important as we go into 2023. We expect a similar type of year. There's still a lot of uncertainty. And once January hit, again, we've seen that online giving index soften. And so while it's a little less severe right now, it has softened, and it's crises that are really helping to uphold it. We expect that our year-end holiday fundraising is going to be very important in really communicating the need so that all those able show up at the end of the holiday year. All right, at this point, we know it's extremely challenging out there. It's now time to ask the question, so what are we going to do? Let's break down what we can control into 5 ways your charity can begin to take action today. Focus on your understanding your donors, creating youth engagement programs and opportunities, rebuilding your value proposition for volunteers, investing in capacity and thoughtfully addressing staff burnout, and taking a holistic approach to digital transformation. Alrighty, number 1, doubling down to understand your donors. To do so, the following questions can be really helpful to ask yourself and or your team to start thinking about ways to reach out and build an authentic connection. How can we make donating a meaningful experience, not just an action? What can we do to revisit our core values of empathy and apply those to our donors' experiences as we do so well for our beneficiaries? How can we show that we both appreciate their contributions and the change they're making? How can we help them to feel and see the impact they create and that they are not alone, but rather part of a group of like-minded change makers? On a more tangible level, asking donors important questions is a good start. Questions like, why is your charity's work important to them? How did they come to learn about your organization? And what types of updates they'd like to receive? You can then adapt your engagement plan based on the information you collect, as well as other signals. For example, if they give in memory or in honor of someone, understanding this relationship and approaching them sensitively is critical. To build any great relationship, it's important to know and understand the nuances of who you are talking to. Our work here really comes down to knowing what to ask and listen for, collecting the data we need, and ensuring we maintain it so it's easily accessible and can be actioned. A CRM really is key in order to store these important details and then leverage it to nurture and build thriving relationships. Number 2, let's now talk about the next generation. We've talked about the coming giving gap for many years, yet the data shows that progress is stalled or declining. The giving report this year showed that 49% of charities are dissatisfied with the level of engagement of 18 to 30-year-olds with their charity. Yet, only 22% say they have implemented any strategies intended to engage with younger Canadians. You are likely saying, how can I prioritize younger Canadians when they give comparatively little? How can I make time for building relationships for the future with younger people when I am challenged to just raise what I need today? One of the interesting correlations we found is that charities that report that they are now raising less than they did pre-pandemic note steeper declines in engagement rates among younger Canadians when compared to charities that increased or maintained pre-pandemic fundraising levels. That data point speaks to the opportunity of engaging youth, not just for preparing for the future, but to support the health of our programs today. From last year's iteration of the Giving Report, we know that younger generations maintain a higher level of trust in charities than older Canadians. They are also more likely to take steps to learn about issues, spread the word on social media, and engage in protests and other types of activations. For those who do not give today, they intend to give in proportionate numbers when they are able to do so financially. Over time, young Canadians will need to fill the shoes of older donors, a group that many charities currently see as their most important supporters. But engaging younger Canadians is key to future sustainability, and doing so, an opportunity to learn new approaches and practices for growth. If you are ready to get started, here are a few strategies to consider. Start an advisory of young Canadians to help build your program. Initially focus on engagement over no donation appeals, offering meaningful volunteer opportunities, educational events and experiences, and opportunities for younger Canadians to lend their voice and influence as a starting contribution to your organization. Tailor your messaging to this group to focus on the aspects of your work that is most aligned with their values. Our research shows young Canadians care deeply about social justice, the environment, and mental health in particular. And of course, you need to connect with younger Canadians where they are and in the ways they expect. Your online presence, from your website to your social media channels, is critical, as is ensuring a smooth mobile experience. Number 3, supporting volunteers. When it comes to the third area that we need to take action, we need to better support our volunteers. Volunteers are the lifeblood of the charitable sector, but it's clear that we're not doing enough to keep them. 55% of charities have reported they have fewer volunteers today than they did before the pandemic. On top of that, 48% of charities say that volunteer hours are significantly below or moderately below pre-pandemic levels. Again, we need to invest and start by opening a conversation to understand what gets them motivated, what keeps them engaged, what prevents them from investing more hours, what leads them to feeling burnt out, or what causes them to step away. We need to open a conversation. The conversation also extends to funders. We need to ensure our funders understand what's required to do our mission-based work. We are highly concerned about attracting and retaining volunteers and staff. We know we need investment. We need to extend honest conversation to funders so they see that capacity is essential to driving the mission-based work they care deeply about. And finally, we need to take a holistic look at digital transformation and start progressing more quickly. Canadian charities lag on digital, and the smaller the charity, the more extreme the lag. We're at a point where 1 in 3 charities will soon find it hard to continue doing the work they're doing if they do not improve their digital capabilities. That's self-reported by Charities, by the way. That 1 in 3 not able to continue doing what they're doing without improving their digital capabilities. There are impossible choices to be made about what work gets prioritized and what work gets done, but those who can't prioritize digital work, they will fall farther behind. Digital transformation is about reimagining service delivery in a digital age. It's the process of using digital technology to create new or modify existing organizational processes, culture, and experiences to meet changing organizational requirements. It's about creating change faster. The pandemic forced everyone to rapidly adopt new technologies and ways of working. What was missed in the rush was the underlying work that really supports transformation, upskilling staff and hiring for the right skills, and the unsexy work like documenting processes, making strategic technology decisions, getting a really good handle on organizational data and cybersecurity practices. Focus on culture as much or more than the technology. In our Charity Growth Academy that CanadaHelps launched this past year, it's in pilot mode. It's just about to, we're readying it for general availability. The single biggest barrier to success identified was culture. We will soon move out of that pilot period, and I encourage you to visit the Charity Growth Academy site and sign up for it for when the broader program is launched. It's here to help charities advance on their digital transformation journey. So with that, I'd like to end by doing the same poll we did at the beginning. You can see it on your screens now. And then we'll move into a Q&A and start that Q&A after we have a reflection upon the results, the comparative results of the poll. I think we're just going to tabulate these results and then share the comparative results on the screen. Interesting. Well, I think I'm happy to see that there's fewer people that are not sure whether they're pessimistic or optimistic. They have an opinion. I think that's an exciting thing. So we see when we did the study in November 2023, the online study of the 3,000 charities, 6% were unsure. At the start of the session, we had 8% unsure, and we're down to 3%. So that's a win. I'm happy to see that. I can also see that this, possibly you read a little bit beforehand, but I'm not sure, but that very optimistic score. So when we did the study in November was higher than where we're at today. So you can see that we had 62% that were optimistic when you combine the optimistic and very optimistic, whereas this group was at 48% and continues to be at 48%. We haven't changed, so we haven't shifted much, actually. Little movement here, just a little bit, a few people that were not sure it looks like have maybe shifted into that pessimistic. And if this was something that the CanadaHelps CEO Duke Chang wrote about in the Giving Report, it's quite an interesting part of the report, in my opinion. Is when can we be too optimistic? Is there a point in time where, as a sector, we have to be optimistic? That is what we do. We're here to solve the most pressing problems that society has. And to do that, to really take on systemic challenges, we have to believe in change and believe that there's hope. And so we're optimistic by nature is our argument. But that said, you've seen the stats here, 57% of charities unable to meet demand, growing levels of Canadians turning to charities, and pressures on fundraising and declining rates in giving participation. And so we ask everyone to really reflect upon this. And, it's not less about optimism and pessimism, and really standing up and saying, I would suggest, upon further reflection, it's okay to be optimistic, but it's not okay to not stand up as we really, as a sector, see such concerning trends that we really need to address together and do through conversation. So with that, I look forward to questions, and even questions on some of that opinion that I've added at the end.
Wonderful, Shannon. Well, thank you so much. I just want to clarify one quick thing that we had a couple of questions on there. I think we said November 2023 study, and I think we meant that was the November 2022 study. So thanks for those of you who caught that, and just a little bit of clarification there for you. So Shannon, kicking off the Q&A, and you may or may not have data to be able to answer these questions, but one interesting one that came in: are the Canadian trends that you're seeing here consistent with wider global trends in giving?
Oh, interesting. So I don't have great data on that. So oftentimes we'll find that one platform will communicate. And so that's really, and their data may differ. It may depend upon which charities are using their platform. So I can't say I can really answer that well today. What we all know is that inflation is definitely impacting everyone, and increased demand is impacting charities, the majority of charities in many different regions. And really, I'd just like to say that that's really why we wanted to do such a diverse cross-section of Canadian charities, and did that research to really understand, because it's really anecdotally, it varies based on type of services that you're providing. But we know by and large, 31% of charities have raised less than before, and that 57% are unable to meet demand here in Canada. And I expect we would see some very similar trends in some of the other similar nations.
Yes, I think you're probably right there, Shannon. And you just touched briefly again on inflation, and we had quite a few questions and comments coming in around that. Folks that are very concerned about the rising interest rates, the inflation, how that's impacting both people who are needing to access services, but also people's ability to give. So do you think that the giving drop is related to income loss, inflation, and some of those economic trends that we're seeing, and that might rebound should the economy change in the next couple of years?
Yeah, I'd say so. Definitely at CanadaHelps, it's the new donors and the donors that really make just a couple of gifts. So we would classify them as smaller donors in terms of their value and the amount that they're giving. That's really where we saw most of the drop off in the last 2 years. But that said, when I look at the giving participation rates, it's about, we need to crack the nut together. There needs to be stronger giving participation. We need to get these messages out there and ensure that Canadians understand, because what we do know is when we can clearly articulate need, there's many Canadians who are able, that show up. And the data, to me, when you look at giving participation rates, especially amongst higher income households, indicates that there's much more capacity for individuals to show up. So I think we really have to come up with compelling ways to share the need. At CanadaHelps, we're doing a lot of that through the data, and we love partnering with charities, because whenever we get out there and media is interested in sharing the story, they want to have that real story to understand what the impact is on individuals. And this is the work that we're always doing, But we really, I think telling it at the sector level becomes very compelling to Canadians.
Well, on that note, Shannon, do you have, as part of the report, is there a place where people can go to get more detailed data, say on like the subsectors? So we had folks asking about, is some of this data available that is sliced so that we can see, how are different particular sectors such as, health or social services, how are these trends impacting them specifically?
Actually, there is some data on that. So in international was really the category that was the call out this year, with the huge spike in donations to the international category and most notably to Ukraine. We didn't really go much deeper on it in this report because we didn't see quite as significant as changes, although I do think that we had talked about arts charities in the past report, and I do think that kind of softer results for arts charities continued. There's some of that data in the appendix, but we didn't, there was two areas that we really didn't focus on this year, and it was by category and it was by provinces, because we didn't see quite as much of the changes happening as we've seen in past years. So those weren't as big of a focus, but there is some data in the appendix. And my contact information is available. If there's a particular question, I'm always happy to pull up the back end data to see if there's anything else I could provide.
Wonderful. We also had some questions that I think are kind of linked. So a little bit about where there might be data for businesses or private corporations that, like their giving habits as opposed to the individual donors, but also some questions about whether some of the, for instance, the businesses that are giving might be impacting the ways that individuals are donating. So for instance, if they're giving at the cash register, or they're doing micro donations that way, or they're supporting a company that, say gives 1% of their, funds to a particular charity. Do you think that the overall that the ways that people are giving maybe is changing a little? So perhaps the reliance on the tax receiving, and that form of giving is maybe a bit misleading?
So we do get access to the Charities T3010 data, and that shows total giving that's received. So there is a good chunk of giving that is not claimed, and so that's very interesting to look at. And that's where when we look at overall total giving through the CRA data, we're looking at the T3010 data, and then we look at receipted donations. So we do look at both. So it's not that we're seeing overall giving, it's not just receipted, it's total giving as well. I actually think that's a really interesting area for us to dive into. So one of the things that's hard is when it comes to unreceipted revenue, we don't have a way of tracking today what came from corporations versus individuals and is unreceipted. And that's really something that I think, I know Imagine Canada years ago did do some work to estimate how that split out. And I think it's something that we've asked before. We don't have good insight as to how that rest of the pool breaks down. But while I can't give you a good answer today, I definitely think I'm going to put it on my list to see what's possible for next year to delve into that.
That's a great clarification, Shannon, about the T3010, because we had a few questions about that, even for instance, are more people maybe participating in, charitable lotteries and such, and then not making a receivable donation or something like that. So
while I can't give you the individual, I will say there's quite a bit of information that you can find in the giving report that I haven't covered today, because there's just so much in there. We talk about giving, there's appendices that break it down by type of gifts. So inter-charity gifts, receipted gifts, government funding, and so forth. That data is available, and you can see the timeline period as well. So you can definitely delve in there. There's also information in terms of types of gifts. So but it's more from the perspective of charities and how they're doing raising major gifts and different types of giving programs and their levels of investment. So there's definitely some more insights to delve into there. And I apologize that we couldn't cover them all here.
It's a big report, Shannon. So there is a lot. I encourage anybody, everyone to go and take a look at it. The link there, I think, is on the screen and will be in the follow-up material that you receive in the slide deck there. We're going to finish off, I think, with one last question. Do you think that with the concerns about the younger donors and engaging them, is a new narrative or a new approach needed to really bring them on board, as opposed to maybe there was sort of an expectation that just as they moved into those older generational brackets, that they would just pick up the mantle and continue giving at the same level that perhaps their parents and grandparents did? So do you think we need a new approach, and how can we do that without there's a lot of I'm going to say gloominess in some of the data. How do we encourage them and keep them optimistic and inspire them to take part?
Well, I think there's so much to unpack there, but I am actually really excited about the younger generation. Environics Analytics actually has their segmentation that they do for younger generations. It's fascinating because they have different segments, and you can really start to identify some of the segments that are just so civically minded, so geared to being change makers. And that's who, when we do our marketing at CanadaHelps, we're thinking about. So we launched a new brand called Unite for Change. It's specifically targeting younger Canadians after doing a lot of research. And really what I would suggest is that this is a generation with more young change makers than any other previous generation had at that stage. They are engaged, they're informed, they're learning about causes, they're showing up for causes. And so I have great optimism. If they're able, they'll give. But I think you're right that there is a change in how we need to engage with younger Canadians. They're just not going to give because their parents gave to that and they volunteered with their parents, or all those traditional ways that many of us, like from my generation, may have come to find their favorite charities. They're very independent and are going to go where they think the right causes are for them, and they're going to go where they see momentum. And I think what the most important thing we need to do, we have to be listening and working with them and ready to say, we might need to change, and be excited about that change and listen to what they'd like to see us doing and how. I know I just would suggest go to the CanadaHelps website and then go to Unite for Change. We did it working with young Canadians, real change makers, and you'll see it's a very dramatically different brand. We're really trying to listen, and we really put a lot of emphasis on that particular site, on social justice, on engagement, and these are just some of the tricks. But our goal with that site isn't just to generate donations through CanadaHelps. What we want to do is help you. We're trying to figure out what is the right way to engage younger Canadians and nurture them through to becoming a donor, so we can come back and share it with the sector. That is our goal. And we're trying a lot of different things like petitions and quizzes and things like that. We're just getting started, but keep your eyes on it, and each giving report, we hope to be able to come back with more insights as to how to engage young Canadians. But what I can say, what has been instrumental to this day, is listening and working with young Canadians. If you aren't sitting side by side, you're very at risk of not doing some of the things that they're looking for, and they feed new energy into your organization. And so that's a starting place for me.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Shannon. I love that idea of new energy. I think we've left things maybe on a bit of a nice optimistic note there. I love that. Did you have any last comments you wanted to share before we wrap up today?
Just thanks so much for having me, and for everyone for joining today. Don't hesitate to reach out if you have any more questions.
Lovely. Well, everyone, I'm sorry that we weren't able to get to all of the questions today. You can see the contact information is there on the screen, so please don't hesitate to reach out to CanadaHelps directly or to go check out the giving report in detail. So thank you again so much, Shannon, for such a great presentation. To everyone, thank you also for joining us today. You will get a follow-up email tomorrow with a link to the webinar recording and the slide deck. So you can check out all of that great data there. Please feel free to share that link with your colleagues. It's all publicly available. The email will also include a survey link you can fill out with your feedback on today's webinar, and you should see a survey link pop up right here in Zoom following the session as well. I hope that you'll join us for our next free webinar, which is coming up later this month. We're going to be welcoming Keela to talk about how to move beyond the one-time gift. So I think quite nicely in tandem with some of the things we've talked about today. You'll find information on that and all of our upcoming webinars at charityvillage.com/webinars. Thank you again for taking part in today's session. I wish all of you a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.
You.